Why are we so accustomed to blindly trusting history textbooks, even when physical evidence from the past screams the opposite? We are told that the Middle Ages were an era of hopeless darkness, where humanity fought against constant epidemics and starvation, and living to the age of 30 was considered a major achievement. The official version claims that people of that time were focused solely on survival, possessing neither complex technology nor resources. However, when we walk into museum halls and look at knights' armor, this tidy picture of the world begins to crumble before our eyes. What stands before us are not just pieces of iron designed to protect a body from a sword strike, but true masterpieces of jewelry art, the complexity of which baffles even modern engineers. These suits of armor are decorated so exquisitely and with such detail that they resemble work done by electroplating, a technology that, according to official records, simply could not have existed back then. A logical question arises. Where did people who were supposedly dying of plague and malnutrition get the time, energy, and high-tech means to create such masterpieces? If we believe historians that life was short and full of hardship, then who spent years etching complex patterns onto greaves and pauldrons, and why? This contradiction is impossible to ignore. Either our ideas about the technological level of our ancestors are fundamentally wrong, or these protective shells were not created for the people we are told about at all. Before we look inside these mysterious iron shells and try to understand who their true owner was, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. This will help you not miss the truth that has been hidden for centuries, which we are starting to uncover right now. The strangest thing about these artifacts is not even how they were made, but who they were intended for. Upon close examination of the designs, a doubt creeps in. Are you sure a human sat inside this armor? If we analyze the appearance of the helmets, it becomes obvious that their creators were guided by some other, non-human logic. Instead of functional visors that provide visibility and airflow, we often see grotesque smiles, animal snouts, or bird beaks frozen in metal. Why would a warrior going into battle depict a permanent, unnatural smile on his face? In the conditions of real combat, where every detail matters, such decorations would be not only useless, but dangerous, as an opponent's weapon could easily snag on protruding elements. Such a variety of shapes suggests that this was not protection, but camouflage. Perhaps we are dealing with a kind of cargo cult, where the creatures inside tried to imitate humans or animals to pass as one of us. Or maybe these were shells for humanoid robots, whose creators tried to give them anthropomorphic features, sometimes slipping into a sinister caricature. Remember the old rules of knightly tournaments. Commoners were often forbidden to touch knights, and the battles themselves resembled a clash of machines watched by spectators. If we assume that inside were not humans, but piloted mechanisms or creatures of a different biological nature, then the strange, smiling masks make sense. This was an interface for interaction, an attempt to create a face where there wasn't one. The anatomy of this armor raises even more questions. Many helmets have a neck opening so narrow that it is physically impossible to push a human head through it without fatal consequences. This is a design feature that completely rules out the presence of a creature with a human skull and cervical spine inside. However, for a creature with a different body structure, for example, someone who has no rigid skeleton and is capable of changing shape, such a spacesuit could be the perfect refuge. We are approaching a line where familiar history ends and a realm of frightening guesses begins about who really hid behind the mask of the noble knight. If you carefully study what is commonly called the defensive weaponry of the past, it becomes obvious that many helmets were not created to save a human life in battle at all. Traditional logic suggests that the ideal helmet should have a streamlined shape so that an opponent's blade glances off without causing harm. However, the reality presented in museum exhibits completely crosses out this principle of rationality. We encounter a whole range of metal headpieces decorated with complex embossed faces, often distorted by strange, grotesque grimaces. Why does a warrior whose life hangs by a thread need a smile frozen in metal? This seems like a ridiculous excess for starving Europe, but if we cast aside the version about human vanity, a much more frightening picture opens up. Imagine a battlefield where a steel-clad figure is moving towards you with an unchanging, wide, artificial smile. This spectacle evokes not so much respect for the blacksmith's skill as primal horror and a feeling that something is deeply wrong, like something from the uncanny valley. But the problem isn't just the psychological effect. Any protruding element on armor is a death sentence for the owner. A long nose, massive mustache, animal ears, or a bird's beak. These are all ideal levers that can be hooked by a weapon to break an opponent's neck. Creating such a design for a human participating in hand-to-hand combat is functional suicide. Therefore, these elements served a different function, more important than physical safety, or the owner possessed such strength and technology that they could disregard the danger of close combat. Here we come to the hypothesis of mimicry. If inside the armor there was a creature whose physiology was radically different from human, then a helmet depicting a face could serve as a disguise. This is an attempt by an alien intelligence to look like us, a sort of interface for interacting with the local population. A creature that has no face in our understanding put on a metal mask with average human features, nose, mouth, eyes, so as not to cause panic with its true appearance. The smile in this context might be an attempt to express friendliness, which, due to a misunderstanding of human facial expressions, turned into a terrifying grimace. Or perhaps we are seeing traces of a cargo cult. When the real gods in high-tech spacesuits left this world, people began copying their appearance, creating metal masks but no longer understanding their true purpose, turning functional elements of breathing systems into decorative noses and beaks. Particular attention is drawn to helmets made in the shape of animal heads, dogs, birds, or fantastic beasts. Historians write this off as heraldry and a desire to intimidate the enemy. But remember the legends about dog-headed men and other chimeras. Perhaps these helmets didn't depict animals, but hid creatures underneath, whose heads actually had an elongated shape that didn't fit into a standard human helmet. Or perhaps the beak-like visors served as a housing for complex life support systems, filters, or breathing apparatuses necessary for those for whom Earth's atmosphere was not native. Some specimens look more like deep-sea diving suits than knightly armor, which leads to thoughts about the aquatic origin of their wearers. This version about camouflage and technological suits explains why knights were often perceived as a higher caste that commoners were forbidden to touch. They were not just feudal lords, but operators of complex war machines, or the machines themselves, inside which a different life pulsed. The helmet was just the tip of the iceberg, a facade hiding the true essence. But if the face of the helmet raises a lot of questions and suspicions, then the construction of the rest of the body hidden under the armor causes real shock in anyone who is even slightly familiar with human anatomy. Looking at the design of the limbs of this armor, it becomes definitively clear. The creature for which they were forged moved completely differently than we are used to. When we shift our gaze from the frightening masks of the helmets to the construction of the armor's body itself, questions begin to accumulate exponentially. If the face can still be written off as oddities of fashion or ritual symbolism, then the fundamental laws of physics and anatomy cannot be ignored. Any trauma surgeon or biomechanics specialist looking at certain medieval plate armor will tell you that a human placed inside such a structure would turn into an immobile statue, or worse, would suffer injuries incompatible with life at the very first attempt to take a step. We are facing engineering solutions that are not just uncomfortable, they are hostile to human physiology. Let's start with the next section. A surprising number of surviving specimens have a throat opening so narrow and rigid that it baffles any researcher. The human skull is a rigid bone structure of a specific volume. To put on a solid metal collar, it must either be detachable or have a diameter larger than the head. However, we see monolithic constructions with openings that a teenager's hand could barely squeeze through. How could an adult warrior push his head through there? Official science remains silent or offers complex theories of assembly, but there is a simpler, albeit shocking, explanation. This hole was not intended for the passage of a hard skull. It was calculated for a creature whose body is capable of deforming, compressing, and flowing through narrow barriers, like liquid or muscle without bones. Going lower, we discover even more glaring discrepancies in leg protection. Human walking is a complex process requiring the bending of the knee joint, rotation of the hip joint, and mobility of the ankle. If you block even one of these nodes, movement becomes torturous. If you block them all, impossible. Nevertheless, there are suits of armor where the greaves and cuisses are essentially solid metal pipes, or are connected in a way that completely precludes knee bending. The thigh section transitions into the shin without the necessary hinges, creating a rigid frame. For a human with a femur and tibia, this is a prison. In such attire, one cannot mount a horse, cannot squat, cannot even move one's legs normally. But who was this made for? The answer suggests itself if we allow for the existence of a different life form. These suits of armor are perfect for creatures devoid of an internal skeleton. For an organism that does not depend on the leverage of bones and joints, a rigid outer shell becomes a salvation. In this case, the armor performs the function not of protection, but of an exoskeleton, an external support frame. A creature possessing a soft plastic body filled the internal space of the armor, using the metal as a fulcrum for its muscles. For such a creation, the absence of a knee joint in the armor is not a problem, because its limb can bend at any point or retract inside entirely. This hypothesis instantly explains the narrow necks, the strange proportions, and the unbending limbs. The metal shell served as a spacesuit, allowing a soft-bodied creature to maintain its shape and act in an environment aggressive to it, for example, on land, in conditions of gravity to which it is not adapted. We see technology allowing jelly to take the form of a warrior capable of holding a sword and delivering crushing blows. Inside this steel capsule hid not a human suffering from confinement, but something that felt right at home there, protected from the outside world by an impenetrable wall. But who is capable of living in such a tight tin can, controlling it with strength and dexterity superior to a human's? Earth's nature knows organisms that fit this description perfectly. They are smart, strong, have no bones, and possess completely different principles of life support related to radiation and blood biochemistry. The answer to the riddle of knightly armor may lie not in space, but in the depths of the ocean, where biology took a completely different evolutionary path. We are talking about those we are used to seeing on a dinner plate, but whose abilities we fatally underestimate. The candidate for the role of the inhabitant of these iron shells might seem unexpected only at first glance. But if we cast aside anthropocentrism and turn to the dry facts of biology, the puzzle comes together with frightening precision. We are used to considering humans the pinnacle of evolution, but in conditions of global catastrophes or a changed environment, our fragile bodies turn out to be completely uncompetitive. At the same time, organisms exist in nature whose adaptive abilities border on science fiction. We are talking about cephalopod mollusks, creatures that surpass mammals in many parameters and have the potential to survive in the most extreme conditions, including high levels of radiation. The key to their incredible vitality lies in biochemistry. It is known that in the exclusion zone of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, so-called black mold thrives, a fungus rich in melanin. This substance, which in humans is only responsible for skin color and protection from UV rays, in this case works as a powerful adaptogen, converting lethal gamma radiation into chemical energy for growth. This phenomenon is called radiosynthesis. Now let's pay attention to the ink of cuttlefish and octopuses. This substance is practically pure, concentrated melanin. These creatures are born with a built-in radiation shield and a reserve of a substance that allows them not just to survive, but to thrive in conditions where a human would get radiation sickness. If we assume that in the past the planet survived a nuclear conflict or another catastrophe with a release of radiation, it is mollusks that would have become the dominant species, ready for expansion onto land under the cover of protective spacesuits. But protection is only half the battle. To control a complex mechanical exoskeleton, which is essentially what knightly armor is, outstanding intelligence and a special nervous system are required. And here, mollusks again leave humans far behind. We have one central brain, and if the connection to a limb is broken, it becomes useless. In cephalopods, the nervous system is decentralized. 2/3 of an octopus's neurons are not in the head, but in the tentacles. Each limb has its own brain, capable of making decisions autonomously. The brightest example of this autonomy is the hectocotylus, a modified tentacle of some males designed to deliver genetic material. It is capable of detaching from the body and traveling independently in search of a female, navigating in space and making decisions without the participation of the main organism. Imagine a creature that has not one mind, but 8 or 10, working in a unified network. Placing such a creature in a suit of armor, we get the perfect pilot. It doesn't need to turn its head to look into the viewing slit. Its sensors and limbs can act independently, controlling every joint of the armor with incredible efficiency. Add to this the physiology of the circulatory system. Flowing in the veins of these creatures is not red iron-based blood like ours, but blue blood, saturated with copper, hemocyanin. This substance transports oxygen more efficiently in cold environments and at low pressure. Moreover, they have not one heart, but 3. 1 main and 2 branchial hearts. Such a system ensures colossal endurance and vitality. If one heart stops, the others will continue to support life. Copper in the blood, lack of bones, distributed intelligence, and natural protection from radiation, all of this paints a portrait of the ideal warrior capable of existing inside a metal hull that would be a grave for a human. The soft body fills the entire space of the armor, using it as an external skeleton, compensating for the lack of its own. This theory might sound like a figment of an overactive imagination, were it not for the fact that chronicles and legends of different peoples have preserved specific descriptions of rulers and gods that correspond suspiciously accurately to this biological profile. History remembers the names of those whose physiology caused bewilderment among contemporaries, and whose nicknames we are used to interpreting allegorically, not noticing the literal meaning. Does this sound like science fiction? Maybe. But if we turn to historical chronicles and legends, which official science prefers to interpret allegorically, we discover striking coincidences. History has preserved the names of specific individuals whose physical characteristics and nicknames baffle researchers but fit perfectly into the theory of intelligent mollusks in exoskeletons. The most vivid and controversial example is the legendary leader of the Danish Vikings, the conqueror of England, Ivar the Boneless. Official historiography is at a dead end regarding this figure. On one hand, sagas describe him as a furious berserker, the greatest strategist, and a ruthless warrior who struck terror into enemies and led the great heathen army. On the other hand, the nickname the Boneless forces historians to attribute severe genetic diseases to him, such as osteogenesis imperfecta, where bones break from the slightest effort. We are asked to believe that in the harsh world of the early Middle Ages, where strength decided everything, the leader of the Vikings was a severely disabled man who was carried on a shield because he could not walk. This version does not withstand any criticism. How could a man with bones as fragile as glass survive in battle, let alone personally participate in fights and enjoy unquestioned authority among cutthroats? However, If we discard medical diagnoses and take the nickname literally, the picture instantly clears up. Ivar was boneless not because his bones were sick, but because he had none at all. Imagine a powerful creature belonging to the cephalopod class placed in that very high-tech exoskeleton armor we discussed earlier. Such a death machine would possess superhuman strength, reaction speed, and invulnerability. For a creature without bones, being carried on a shield could be a method of transporting a heavy life support suit to the battlefield, or it is a description of some platform necessary for him outside of water. His ferocity and combat successes receive a logical explanation. Facing the Anglo-Saxons was not a cripple, but a representative of a different, biologically superior species, protected by steel armor. This theory finds confirmation not only in Scandinavian sagas, but also in global mythology scattered across different continents. Practically every ancient culture has legends about gods who came from the water. Remember the expression blue blood, denoting belonging to the highest aristocracy? We are used to considering this a beautiful metaphor, but biology suggests otherwise. As we have already found out, the blood of mollusks and arthropods contains hemocyanin based on copper, which gives it a blue color. Ancient texts might be telling us the truth in plain text. Rulers, the elite, gods, really had blood of a different color because they were not human. Turn your gaze to the east. Indian Vedas abound with descriptions of gods with blue or azure skin. Krishna, Vishnu, and many other celestial beings are depicted exactly this way. Art historians insist on symbolism, but what if ancient artists were simply recording reality? The pale skin of a creature with blue blood would have exactly that shade. Similar legends can be found among the indigenous peoples of New Zealand, Australia, and South America. Everywhere the same scenario can be traced. Powerful creatures emerge from the sea, possessing knowledge and strength inaccessible to humans. They become the first kings, teachers, and lawmakers. The legends of the Dogon about fish people. The Sumerian Oanne, a man in a fish skin, or perhaps in a spacesuit. The sea gods of the Polynesians. These are all links in one chain. Humanity has preserved the memory of contact with a civilization that emerged from the depths for thousands of years. These creatures, protected by the metal of armor and natural melanin, began their expansion from coastal zones, gradually subjugating the land. Ivar the Boneless was, perhaps, one of the later representatives of this dynasty, or a general participating in the redivision of the world. Everything points to the fact that the history we know was carefully edited and rewritten to hide the fact of a global war of species, or a long period of coexistence in which humans were assigned a subordinate role. The facts lie on the surface, captured in the metal of knightly armor and the lines of ancient sagas. One only needs to gather the courage to put them together. When we finally gather all the scattered fragments of this historical mosaic into a single whole, a picture opens up before us capable of overturning our habitual worldview. We have traveled a path from bewilderment over the excessive luxury of medieval metal to the realization of biological inconsistencies that cannot be ignored. Now it becomes crystal clear. What has been gathering dust in museum halls for centuries under the labels knightly armor is actually something completely different. This is not just protective gear for a fragile human body, but high-tech spacesuits, complex life support systems, and mechanical exoskeletons created for representatives of a completely different life form. All those oddities that historians wrote off as quirks of fashion or the ineptitude of ancient masters suddenly acquire rigid, functional logic. Grotesque helmets with elongated dog snouts and bird beaks no longer seem like caricatures. These were necessary design solutions, creating additional volume to accommodate non-standard heads, massive breathing filters, or tentacles saturated with sensors. Immobile, monolithic legs without knee joints, which would turn a human into a helpless statue, became ideal support columns for a soft-bodied creature. Inside such a rigid tube, a mollusk having no skeleton of its own felt comfortable, using the walls of the armor as a fulcrum for its powerful musculature. We see not primitive crafts, but the result of a highly developed species adapting to an alien environment: land. Those whom legends call blue-blooded aristocrats, gods, or heroes were intelligent invaders or neighbors who came from the depths. Their copper-based blue blood, their distributed intelligence, and their ability to withstand radiation made them a dominant force. Encased in metal, decorated with complex electroplating, they towered over the human crowd like indestructible titans. That is precisely why they could not be touched. Precisely why they hid their true faces behind frozen metal masks with an eternal, frightening smile. The story of knightly tournaments and noble duels is just a beautiful screen behind which hides the memory of times when the planet was ruled by creatures in hermetic shells. This theory forces us to reconsider absolutely everything we knew about the Middle Ages. Perhaps the so-called Dark Ages were dark not because of human ignorance, but because of the shadow cast by this powerful alien civilization. Humanity survived alongside those who surpassed us biologically and technologically, and whose empty metal shells we now reverently preserve, having forgotten their true purpose. We look at exhibits and see the heroic past of humans, while in reality, we are looking at the equipment of our former overlords. Now that the veil of secrecy has been lifted, I want to turn to you. What do you think? Were the Middle Ages a battlefield or a zone of cooperation between humans and other forms of life? Could the legends of monsters and gods be descriptions of real contacts with these creatures in exoskeletons? Write your opinion in the comments, for truth is born in dispute and discussion. If this theory made you think and look at familiar things from a new angle, be sure to hit the like button on this video. Share this information with friends because knowledge is the only weapon against oblivion. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't get lost in the flow of information. Ahead of us lie even deeper dives into forbidden history, where we will continue to separate truth from fiction. See you, Seekers!